In a small town, winter covers the ground with a dense layer of snow, emphasizing the atmosphere of loneliness and isolation that runs a red thread through the entire story. Jerry works at a car dealership and is in a deep financial hole. He has big dreams, but their realization always seems unattainable. Despite his outward confidence, he actually feels insecure and restless as his debt oppresses him and he is losing hope of a way out. He is especially worried about the threat of bankruptcy, and a plan based on manipulation and deception begins to mature in his mind. To solve his financial problems, Jerry decides to resort to extreme measures. He is not the only one who feels hopeless. Spouse Peggy becomes increasingly concerned about his secretive behavior as events unfold. She doesn't suspect his real intentions, but intuitively senses that something is wrong. At this time, Jerry begins planning to kidnap his wife to intimidate her money-hungry father into ransoming her. He turns to two criminals to take part in the endeavor. One of them turns out to be Gair, a rough and reckless man, and the other more calculating and experienced, but not without flaws, Gair. Both of them represent the type of people who only exacerbate Jerry's already dire situation. The dialogue between the characters is often filled with misunderstandings and hopelessness. For example, when Jerry explains to Gair that he wants them to capture his wife, he tries to veil his request by using metaphors and subterfuge. This only emphasizes how he tries to talk himself into believing that he has everything under control, when in fact his plan is full of risks and potential consequences. In his internal dialogue, he constantly worries that things could go wrong, and this uncertainty gradually turns against him. One winter evening, Jerry finally gets the time to act. He meets with Gair and Jay at a remote location, and as they discuss the details, it becomes apparent that the criminals don't trust each other too much. Tension builds between them, and it becomes a prototype for impending trouble. Jerry tries to guide them through the plan, but his insecurities and constant anxiety make him susceptible to manipulation. While Gair displays a temper, she seems more calculating, but in this he too is driven by greed that will eventually lead to disastrous consequences. As the two men set off to execute their plan, Jerry stays in the car and begins to realize just how crazy his plan is. He stares out the snowy expanse outside the window, and his thoughts are filled with fear and uncertainty. He can't take his eyes off the way the snow slowly falls to the ground, as if to symbolize all of his failures. Meanwhile, things don't go according to plan. During the execution of the plan, things don't go as expected. Peggy, once in their hands, first of all behaves calmly and reservedly. Her outward calmness contrasts with the panic of the criminals, who do not realize who they are dealing with. At one point, when they are already taking Peggy away, Gair becomes uncomfortable and his onslaught may turn into aggression as he begins to suspect that the situation is getting out of control. Soon after, the local police arrive on the scene, represented by Detective Marge. She is a good, adored police officer and quite perceptive. Despite her good-natured nature, she has a lot of experience in investigations, and she begins to collect evidence. Marge realizes that every observation she makes could be the key to solving the case, and her intuition tells her that there are more serious intentions behind the kidnapping. She begins questioning witnesses and examining the scene, picking up on the smallest details and hints that others might have missed as time goes on. The plot becomes more and more convoluted, especially when Detective Gunderson encounters Jerry, who tries to keep his cool and pass himself off as someone not involved in the incidents. Their conversations are full of tension. The more Jerry tries to deceive Marge, the more suspicious she becomes of him. She notices small details of his nervousness, inappropriate smiles, and strange hesitations in the words he says. Although Marge is historically loyal to her duties and has no reason to think that Jerry might have been involved in the kidnapping, her intuition decides otherwise. Parallel to Marge's investigation, we observe Jerry's inner turmoil. He sinks deeper and deeper into his fears and doubts. With each new setback, his mental state deteriorates. He realizes that he has no control over the situation, and his bad decisions lead to the debt hole in which he finds himself. More often than not, he is in a state of panic and loses confidence in his actions. Every time he thinks about how to get out of the situation, his disbelief in himself only grows stronger as the story progresses. All the characters face the consequences of their own actions. Gair and Jay, seeing that the situation is becoming more and more dangerous, begin to have scandals and disagreements with each other. The relationship between them deteriorates, and each of their attempts to deal with things only makes things worse. What begins as a seemingly simple kidnapping escalates into a real tragedy. Misunderstanding, greed, and fear become the driving forces behind their actions. Each character, in turn, comes to their breaking point, the frozen snow outside the window seeming to epitomize their inner world. Covered in a reliable shroud pulling them down, it all comes to an end when Marge, figuring out the details of what happened, pieces it all together. With the help of her intuitive skills and protocol work, she bends Jerry into captivity. But she still has a lot of testing to do before that happens, and each new discovery about the conversions turns into a parting chord. Each detail builds up into a coherent picture, opposed not only by Jerry, but by everyone involved in the story. In the end, despite his efforts to cover up the crime, the truth comes out. Jerry doesn't stand a chance and fully gets into his game with crime while facing the consequences of his ridiculous schemes. The main themes reflected in the story run through the complexities of the human character, which is seen in contrast to the view of life they all build around them. Whereas Jerry tries to create his reality through manipulation and deceit, Marge is the polar counterbalance where her moral compass and honest attitude of power leads to the uncovering of a secret. Internal and external conflicts occur, which eventually bring the characters to their fatal conclusion. They all become prisoners of their own desires, and each experiences a characteristically natural outcome. Set against a lonely winter scene, contrasted with the clear and distinct facets of each of the characters, concludes this remarkable and poignant story of how carelessness and immorality can lead to unpredictable consequences. It is a story that pays special attention not only to the events, but also to the fears, aspirations, and inner contradictions of the characters, which result in one person's life unexpectedly becoming intertwined with the fates of others.